The desert was chosen because it had no memory, no trees to witness, no cities to plead, no oceans to echo. The sky above it was a flat, brutal blue, an honest emptiness. A watchmaker stood there without a watch, skin the color of a remembered flame, and he regarded the world as a diagram. Across the horizon walked a catastrophe that had learned to stand upright, a silhouette made of horned bone and bad decisions, the fossil of 1,000 extinctions, the name of an inevitability, Doomsday. There is a difference between an event and a rule. Events happen, rules allow them. Dr. Manhattan had learned this lesson when a state of affairs turned his body to vapor and his will stitched it back together atom by atom. A thing like that either makes you a nihilist or a custodian. For a long time he pretended to be the former, drifting through wars like a bored god, counting the seconds between choices that never really were. But the truth, indecent, blunt, was that he'd become the latter. You don't watch the gears forever without learning when to stop the clock. Doomsday did not think about clocks. He thought about pressure gradients, blood, the meteorology of violence. If the universe placed a wall, he became a ram. If it lit a fire, he became the firebreak. If it stabbed, he grew thicker skin. He was a theorem proved by induction. Killed once, killed twice, killed 100 times, and never the same mistake twice. He had beaten gods until they bled, forced hope to bite down on its own tongue, and turned the word again into a threat. He was not the end of stories, he was the end of edits. The air shook as he approached. It was not rage. Rage is a narrative human beings inject into noise. It was simply a body that had found another body and understood with biological piety that the space between them was superfluous. Dr. Manhattan watched the space vanish and explored, simultaneously, every argument that might matter. Choice, cause, continuity. If the world is a film reel and he can touch every frame at once, what does a punch even mean? If survival is a function, then adaptation is just the function learning its own limits. He remembered the glass cathedrals he raised on Mars, lightning-fine structures of silica memory. He remembered the man who called himself smartest as he flooded the future with noise. He remembered the atom made bright for a moment and then discarded, Rorschach's mask boiling into perfect snow. He remembered because remembering was another word for being. Doomsday halted. The pause was not curiosity. Predators don't get curious, they get confident. He inhaled and exhaled like a mine collapse. Dr. Manhattan spoke without mouth or throat. You believe yourself inevitable. The monster did not speak back in syllables. His response arrived as a stance, knees bent, tendons singing one unbroken note. Inevitability prefers to be demonstrated. Inevitable, Manhattan continued, is a provincial word. Rocks say it, rivers say it. But I am not a rock or a river. I am a rule with an opinion. He turned a dune to glass and then to rain and then back to sand without moving. The grains remembered being both wet and hard and dry. To them it was a good joke. Your history is a ladder made out of corpses. Thrown into acid, you learn. Beaten by a radiant god, you learn. Killed by a farm boy from a dead son, you learn. The method is admirable if we ignore the price, but you learn within a system. There must be a stimulus and time for your machine to write new code. You stand on evolution like a crutch. I stand on the Lagrangian of the world. If I alter the terms, your crutch is a stick in a storm. Doomsday's foot dug into the earth, a decision written in soil. He understood very little of talk, but he understood challenges, and a still blue man was a challenge written in defiance. He would walk forward, and bones would break, and then he would walk forward again. That was the complete philosophy. Before we peel skin, Manhattan said, we peel ideas. You think a blow is an answer. I know a blow is an annotation. You adapt to outcomes. I decide premises. You are a conclusion that refuses to end. I am the editor's hand holding a blade over the typeset. There is nothing personal here. There is a machine with a feedback loop. He looked gently at the horned skull, and there is the architect of its electricity. I know the future outcomes of this encounter. In most of them, you fall more beautifully than you rose. The monster bared teeth. Beauty was not among his currencies. He launched a fist forward without theatrics, and the air cracked around the knuckles like glass remembering how to break. The fist met the space where Dr. Manhattan had been. The space accepted the offer and remained empty. I'm here, Manhattan said, now behind him, now above, now at a distance measured in seconds rather than meters. We can fence with the present, if you insist, but I prefer the past that writes you and the future that reads you. The debate continued without voices. Doomsday argued with pressure, and the Blue Man argued with boundary conditions. Bones sprouted and withdrew like answers, trying to stay ahead of their questions. Manhattan turned a shard of the creature's bone spire into calcium smoke, and then into an idea that even hard things can be paused. He set the idea aside. He would need it later. He took in the desert, the sky, the nuisance of time. He had once washed his hands of the world because its pain was too predictable. Every sentence ended with the same period. But he had learned that even a determinist can draw a line. The line was here and now, in a place with no memory, where a thing that only respected success would meet a thing that respected structure. Mercy had its place, so did finality. It is not cruelty to take a match out of the hands of a child, it is stewardship. A convoy of probabilities crossed him like birds wheeling, and he fixed on the sequence that avoided spectacular collateral. No cities shredded for punctuation, no mountains pulled up to prove a point. He would not turn the planet into a thesis defense. He would not make an art project out of extinction. The work could be done clean. He raised a hand because people found gestures comforting, and because even gods indulged stagecraft. The sand stilled. The light bent as if considering a new job title. The blue glow around him was not power, it was policy. If Doomsday had anything like a soul, it had never been consulted. The thing he understood was here, and the interval between intention and impact narrowed to a wire. He moved, he learned, he would learn again, if there was an again to be had. The desert waited, the sky refused to blink. Two definitions of inevitability walked toward each other, one written in bone and fury, the other written in mathematics and silence. Between them there was only the stubbornness of matter and the arrogance of mind. Dr. Manhattan decided to speak to the second kind of stubbornness, his own. "We will do this correctly," he said, "not for spectacle, for closure." And then the argument became kinetic. The first contact was a correction to the air. Shockwaves ran outward in concentric honesty, a textbook illustration about to be ripped out and burned. Doomsday struck the place where the Blue Man existed and was rewarded with nothing but the sensation of having committed to a choice too late. Dr. Manhattan had phased, not into another place, but into a different set of permissions. When he returned already mid-sentence. He duplicated himself because fighting with one body in one timeline is an affectation. 4 versions of him stood at the cardinal points around the monster, and a 5th watched from a second 4 seconds in the future, arms folded in the habit of someone with better things to do. The ring of Manhattans did not attack, they measured. Each blue gaze traced a different layer, chemical, lattice, quantum spin foam, the whispered algorithm coiled at the center of Doomsday's adaptation engine. What keeps you when you refuse to be the same you twice? Doomsday learned from the ring itself. He pivoted without turning his head, launching bone at the Manhattan positioned west by south. The spear met a fluctuation and became a bouquet of harmless ions. The creature did not try that exact configuration again. He never does, and he reached instead for something dirt simple, both fists, downward, crater making. He landed the blow. The ground obligingly tore. The Manhattans did not. One of the blue men, call him the one positioned at now in the grammar of events, touched a horn with 2 fingers. He did not transmute it, did not shatter it. He read it. Information moved one way and then stopped. Doomsday swung to free himself from being understood, but understanding was a solvent. The horn unraveled along lines the creature had not prepared, because one does not evolve against autopsy. Raw force has a religion. Its sacrament is momentum. Its miracle is fracture. Doomsday practiced that religion with ecstasy. He tore the air into strips, and the strips became percussion. One of those strips intersected with a Manhattan clone. The blue man let it sever him, and his halves slid apart with quiet dignity. The halves did not bleed. They simply disagreed about location for a moment, and then reconciled, aligning like pages in a book closing itself. Adaptation is not a god, a voice said from everywhere and nowhere. It's a bureaucrat. It processes inputs, files responses, escalates when needed. Bureaucracies function until the building loses power. Doomsday lunged. Dr. Manhattan stopped powering the building. He did not extinguish the creature's strength or speed. That would have been cruder than necessary. He instead decoupled the local quantum state of Doomsday's adaptive system from the environment by forcing, across a femtosecond, a near-ideal isolation. No noise, no heat bath, no measurement to collapse options into a lesson. Evolution paused, not forever, but for long enough that forever could be made irrelevant. Doomsday's next punch met a new kind of problem, repetition. It landed, and the blue body it met allowed itself to be reduced to bright particulate. In earlier lives, that would have been the point where the monster learned. now sterile, unmeasured. His system could not write. He threw another punch because punching is a species of optimism. The result was a second blue fog, then a third, like candles willing to be blown out. Your greatness, Manhattan said, is conditional. I'm removing the condition. The creature snarled as if the universe were cheating. He didn't understand why his favorite teacher had left the room. So he stopped learning and did what anything does when it cannot adapt. He escalated with volume. He slammed his hands together. The clap shoved the desert into a bowl. The bowl slopped dunes in a ring and exposed rock like bone under scab. The Manhattans rippled, blinked, reassembled. It wasn't a defense, it was a schedule. Then the blue men quit multiplying. They converged into one, and the one cut the theatrics. He stepped inside the radius of Doomsday's arms, every cell of him in lawful trespass, and placed his palm on the creature's sternum. Bones flexed around the touch in muscle memory. The hand did not press or burn. It tuned. You are not a mystery, he said, and that was not an insult. You are an algorithm, with excellent unit tests. The tuning began with chemistry, because sometimes you start with the obvious. Ionic balance is warped. The acid-base interior seas in which proteins perform their little contortions, headed for neutral lies. But chemistry is just a noisy choir. The soloist was elsewhere. Manhattan followed the melody to the adaptive kernel, the small brutal rule that ran under everything like a rat in drywall. It said, survive by rewriting. It said, make the last misfortune impossible. It did not say, withstand the removal of permission to rewrite. He slipped fingers, metaphorical, literal, it didn't matter, into the kernel's logic. It was not DNA alone. Calling it that would have been pious ignorance. It was instruction smeared across scale, in folds of protein and patterns of microtubule dynamics, in stress-responsive epigenetic switches, in a field-level bias that preferred robustness to elegance. He did not delete it. He performed uncomputation. That is harder. Deleting throws away heat and leaves footprints. Uncomputing walks the steps backward until the footprint is a flat ground that never admitted a shoe. Every reversal cost energy. He paid it. The desert air went brighter and thinner, as if the sun had been told to hurry. The sand fused into sheets and then unfused, undecided. The creature's body tried to spike new bone and discovered the blueprint had been rolled up and filed under never. For the first time since it learned to despise fragility, Doomsday hesitated. The hesitation wasn't fear. Predators only fear when a new predator arrives. This was messier, an if-then that no longer knew what then was. He hits, he gets hurt, he gets better. The Tower of Better had missing stairs. He did what all strong things do when logic fails. He threw himself harder at the target, betting that sufficient force could staple the world back into the shape he liked. He landed 5 blows in the time it would take a question mark to fall over. Each blow found a different Dr. Manhattan, who had chosen to be present for it, and made of himself an interruption rather than an obstacle. The interruptions inverted. The blows became calibrations. The calibrations became data. And data, when properly handled, becomes control. Free will bores you, Manhattan said, because the truth often sounds like rudeness. It should. It's a local phenomenon. I can walk it both ways. You believe in learning, so do I. But I choose the syllabus. He widened the isolation field around the adaptive kernel until it included not just the microphysical layer, but also the organism-level reward cascade that underwrote it. Pain and its many rhyming cousins. Without a gradient, there is nothing to optimize against. Without a teacher, punishment is only noise. He made the world quiet for Doomsday. Terribly, perfectly quiet. The creature sagged, which looked like the Earth losing. Manhattan did not gloat. He had, in other lives, mistaken demonstration for purpose. He had chosen spectacle instead of sufficiency. That was the error of men who needed to impress. He no longer needed anything. He reached farther, to the boundary conditions that birthed this thing in a laboratory's recurring murder. He touched with care the first axiom, that repeated death with selection pressure yields an indignant god of fists. He didn't erase the past. That would have torn open everything downstream. He rewrote the measure, the weighting of branches in the story's quantum tree. The branch they were in now became the branch least supportive of continued doomsday. In other branches, the monster would still rampage, still teach heroes humility by breaking their ribs. Here, the probability amplitude that fed his persistence went thin as hunger. Doomsday sensed none of that metaphysics. He felt only that he had become heavy in ways gravity does not account for, as if the world suddenly remembered it had no obligation to let him through. He tried to buy motion with more effort. Effort accepted the currency, and then the exchange rate changed mid-transaction. Manhattan looked into a future second and selected the variant in which no mountain was broken, in which no tectonic plate learned a new syllable. He moved his hand 0.5 millimeter toward the sternum he had been tuning, and in that 0.5 millimeter a program ended without being killed. The adaptive kernel, now isolated, now
now uncomputed, became a thing that had never found a foothold. Doomsday remained a fortress of meat and momentum, minus the clerk that had kept pace with his failures. The monster struck again. It was a good strike. It traveled the distance faithfully, and it struck its object truly. Bone met blue and failed to write a revision. Dr. Manhattan allowed himself to be sent 10 meters backward because friction needed the work, and when he stood, he did not dust himself off. Dusting is for people who care how they look. You can still hit, he said, but you can't learn that you should have hit differently, which means you can't win. Doomsday roared with the sincerity of weather. It was a valid response. It moved sand. It didn't move the outcome. Manhattan could have ended him then by disassembly, molecule to atom to gossip. But disassembly is a story told too often, and he had promised himself closure, not theatrics. He chose sufficiency again. He bound the creature in constraints that were not chords. Space around Doomsday became a local topology, with fewer available translations. Not a box. Boxes can be broken, but a neighborhood where every step forward circled home. The monster charged and discovered that insistence is not the same thing as progress. He tried straight lines and got circles. He tried arcs and got spirals that terminated at his own feet. Honest rage began to look like confusion. Manhattan's voice arrived without air. Philosophy matters because it tells you which tools are lies. You are a champion of the local force here. Now adjustment here. Now, I am a champion of the global rules everywhere. All at once. Local champions always think they can outwork reality. Global champions change what work is. He reached a final time into Doomsday's interior and performed the last necessary kindness. He took away Pain's ability to teach and then took away the desire that needed the lesson. This was not mercy in the sentimental sense. It was removal of the last lever the thing might have used to make itself worse. The monster stopped thrashing not because he surrendered, but because surrender ceased to be a definable action. Without gradients, without learning, without permitted displacement, he had nothing to do that counted as doing. He was still a cliff, and cliffs matter to the shapes of coasts. But no tide would change here again. The fight could have continued as theater. Manhattan chose not to dignify it with more acts. He let the isolation soften into permanence, not a cage, an equilibrium. He stepped back to where ambient physics resumed their usual small talk. The desert reassembled its heat. The sky got over itself, and the horizon remembered distance. Doomsday stood, breathing, because biology is stubborn even when unhurried. He would remain in this slice of world, an object lesson like a warning label printed in bone. If some future fool let him out of this neighborhood into loud, measure-filled space, the engine might sputter back to life. Manhattan accounted for that by writing softly a border into the mathematics of this region that would resist such foolishness. Not a prison, a quiet place with no chalkboards. He thought about the blue glow on his skin and how many people had told him it meant divinity. It didn't. It meant responsibility. The watchmaker's son, who learned that cause and effect are a polite fiction, had at last chosen to be impolite. He turned his eyes toward the wider world, and in that glancing moment, every city on the planet felt, without knowing, the easing of a pressure they'd gotten used to like chronic pain. When he looked back, the creature that had ended ages and careers was a fixed point. It had not been killed because killing is another sermon about power. It had been concluded. There is a difference. The desert breathed. The argument was over. Not because one side shouted louder, but because only one side had the authority to close the book. Dr. Manhattan walked away without turning. Not because he was cruel, but because the problem no longer required attention. Adaptation had found the end of its domain. Authorship had reminded everyone what a domain is. Call it determinism if you want the pedantry. Call it mercy if you need to sleep. It was, in any honest tongue, a win.